I am a housewife and have a 2-year-old child. My name is Alice. I live in a village far from the city. At that time, my profession was a massage therapist because my family used to be massage therapists. So I can massage because it is an inheritance from my family, from my grandparents, also all massage therapists. At that time in my village, there were quite a lot of residents, but there were still many forests. The roads were still dirt, and there was no asphalt road access. We in this village really need help from a midwife or someone who helps in giving birth. At that time, when someone gave birth, it was very difficult to find medicine and help with the birth. One day in 2008, a midwife came to my village who was assigned to help the community process if someone gave birth. The midwife admitted that she was assigned to this village by the government. Indeed, in my village there is a health center and the midwife is where she works. But the midwife also has a place to live that has been provided by the government, precisely in my village area. After 1 month, the midwife stayed. One day she came to my house. "Excuse me, ma'am, I would like to ask for your help. Can I massage you?" said the midwife like that. I answered, "Yes, ma'am." Then I went to her house with the midwife. While I was massaging her, I chatted with the midwife, and the midwife offered me a job at her house as a maid, and I accepted the job to meet my daily needs. The next day, I started working at the midwife's house. Every 8, Emma cleaned her house, washed the dirty dishes, and other housework. I always came on time to work and went home after all the work was done. After a few months of working at the midwife's place, about 4 to 5 months had passed, the midwife talked to me and offered me another job. The job was to help her when someone was about to give birth. I also asked her what I would do at that time, like helping to bring tools or something that the midwife had to provide that was needed. Bringing hot water, bringing towels, washing parts of the baby's organs, and the like. At that time, I accepted the job. Maybe I was an assistant to the midwife, because she told me that during the birthing process, she was very overwhelmed. She needed someone as an assistant to help her. Long story short, I and the midwife have been called a lot to help with the birthing process of residents in the village, and so far, there have been no incidents. We have handled several people who have given birth safely. Almost every week there are people who give birth. Sometimes the time of birth cannot be predicted. Some give birth during the day, morning, evening, or even midnight. And I was given a cell phone by the midwife to receive her call when someone is about to give birth. The midwife was a very kind person, and I was very happy to have a telephone, because at that time, there were still many people who did not have telephones. And the strange incident began from here. When I was relaxing at home with a cup of warm tea in the afternoon at 5 o'clock, the phone rang. It turned out that the caller was the midwife. She said that there was someone who wanted help giving birth. I asked the midwife where the home delivery person was. The midwife said that the person who was going to give birth lived in the end of the village where there were many banana plantations. At first I asked around, but long story short, I rushed to the midwife and asked my husband to take me. I said goodbye to my husband to go because there was someone who wanted to give birth with the midwife. I was taken to the midwife's house with my husband. After arriving at the midwife's house, we rushed off. The sun began to set. I asked the midwife for the exact address of a person who was about to give birth, I said. The midwife answered that the address was at the end of the village. Earlier, I received a phone call, but the person who called did not explain the details of the address, but she gave a pair of names, namely Mr. John and Mrs. Cassie. She said everyone knew. When I heard that answer, I did not know that there were such names in this village. But I continued the journey with the midwife towards the end of the village. Passing a mountain hill and forest, there was no one at that time because it was late at night. After traveling for 1 to 2 hours, there was an old man on the side of the road, and we stopped to ask for an address with a name. It turned out that the old man knew the person. The old man showed his house and the direction, which was another 1 kilometer from here. His house was quite big, but there were many banana plantations. We rushed to the address and arrived at the house that was going to give birth. After we got off the motorbike, I had knocked on the door of his house. Truck, 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 excuse me. Truck, 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 excuse me. I had knocked on the door twice, but no one opened it. The third time I knocked on the door, no one opened it either. But a few moments later, the door opened, and Mr. John opened the door. "Oh, yes, yes, please come in," said Mr. John. I saw that the house was very clean because there were no leaves on the terrace of the house. And the house was so neatly arranged, and I saw a girl who was about to give birth, and the two people were Mr. John and Mrs. Cassie. Mr. John was wearing black cloth trousers, wearing an old belt, and wearing a white shirt. Then Mrs. Cassie was wearing a red traditional dress, but her clothes were worn out or dirty, and she was wearing a black veil. Long story short, we entered her house and prepared to give birth. The midwife asked the girl, "Mother, how is the nausea?" And the midwife asked again whether her stomach hurt or not. After asking twice, the girl who was about to give birth did not answer anything, but she only held her stomach and whined in pain. Ouch, ouch, ouch. After the midwife helped and guided the girl who was about to give birth. But Mr. John went out to wait for his baby to be born, and I was assigned by the midwife to make hot water. This is where the increasingly strange events occurred. When I walked to the kitchen and opened a door, it turned out that from the living room, it went straight to the kitchen with 2 small stairs to go down to the kitchen. At that time, I was confused because there was no gas stove. The cooking utensils were still using wood fuel. I went to the living room again and asked the midwife, "How is this, ma'am? The cooking utensils use fuel." The midwife said to ask Mr. John outside to borrow something to light the fire, namely a lighter. When I came out, I saw Mr. John sitting and still, his eyes facing forward and his body seemed stiff. At first, I was shocked and I said something to him, and Mr. John asked me, "Can you light it?" I said, "Yes, I'll just turn it on." I went back into the house to light a fire, and finally the fire was lit. After that, I was going to get water, but there was no water in the kitchen. It turned out that to get water, you had to leave the house through the kitchen door. So I went to the door. When I opened the kitchen door, I was very surprised to find that there were many people cooking, but outside the fence, specifically in the banana plantation. I saw that the cooked people had human bodies, but their heads were like monkeys. I didn't dare look for too long, and I hurried to get the water. Then I closed the kitchen door again, and I boiled the water. I didn't dare tell anyone about this incident. Then I sat next to the midwife who was in the process of removing the baby. I saw the girl who was about to give birth when she was told to remember God or pray to encourage the baby. The girl didn't want to. He just didn't say anything apart from whining in pain, ouch, 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 ouch. And the sound of a baby crying was heard, indicating that the baby was born. Usually when a baby is born, people will cry with joy and welcome it. But at that time, no one was happy. Cassie's mother and the girl who gave birth did not welcome her. Even Mr. John, who heard the baby's screams from outside, did not rush inside to greet his baby. When the baby was born, the house was quiet. I intend to inform Mr. John that his baby had been born. But when I went out of the house, I saw Mr. John. He was still sitting in the same position with his eyes facing forward, and his body was stiff, not moving at all. After I called him, Mr. John looked towards. I said, "Oh yeah, that's all I said." Mr. John came in, still sitting on the chair outside. While I was told by the midwife to change the clothes of the girl who had just given birth, and I asked Mrs. Cassie, who was sitting next to the girl, to ask clothes to be taken. At that time, Cassie's mother looked at me with sharp eyes and moved her eyes towards the clothes beside her. I thought that there were no clothes beside Mrs. Cassie. I was surprised that suddenly there were clothes, and even though Mrs. Cassie hadn't gone anywhere, she just sat there quietly. After that, I just thought positively about it and didn't ask about it. After that, I was told by Mrs. Cassie midwife to wash the clothes that were full of the blood of the girl who had just given birth. After that, I brought clothes and things that needed to be washed. At that time, I thought about the incident outside the kitchen. I was very scared. I walked slowly towards the kitchen. When I opened the door kitchen to go out and wash, suddenly it was clear that the people who were cooking were still there. I saw clearly that the people who were cooking were human-bodied creatures, but had different types of animals on their heads. There were those with dog heads, pig heads, and had a monkey's head. At that time, my heart was beating very fast. I was very scared and rushed to wash the clothes and others quickly. Then I went back into the house. But when I opened the kitchen door, because I was in a bit of a hurry, I fell on the kitchen stairs, and suddenly I looked up and there was Mr. John standing in front of me. I was immediately shocked. I asked him, "Mr. John, why are you here? Are you following me?" He answered, "Yes, I've been here like that," and he asked me, "Are you okay?" I answered okay, then I went to the living room. A few moments later, I, Mrs. Cassie, the midwife, the girl, and Mr. John were in the room middle of the house. And Mr. John was holding his baby while saying, "My grandson has been born, my grandson has been born." After a while, the midwife asked permission to leave the house because her job was done. Mr. John gave wages to the midwife who had helped give birth. The story is we left the house to go home. When heading to the motorbike that the midwife brought, I had time to ask her, "Did the midwife feel anything strange while at home?" I said. The midwife replied, "What's strange, Mrs. Alice?" "Everything is safe, nothing strange," said the midwife. I told the midwife what I saw outside the kitchen earlier, but she didn't believe it and said, "Don't make me afraid," said the midwife. At that time, I was walking home on a motorbike with the midwife, and I didn't want to look towards her house. At that time at 11 p.m., we arrived near my house. But I didn't stop right at my house because I was going to buy something first. At that time, the midwife came home, at that time. Suddenly, Mr. John appeared on the side of the road, but quite far away, but I saw clearly that it was Mr. John, and I was shocked and turned my face, but I didn't tell anyone. I intended to buy my husband chicken rice from the chicken rice seller. The seller of chicken rice was an adult woman. I was asked by her, "Where have you been? It's late at night and you just got home." I said, "I've been helping the midwife to help someone who is giving birth." The seller's mother was named Amber. Amber asked me, "Where is the person who gave birth?" I answered and detailed the address. Suddenly, Mrs. Amber was shocked. She asked me several times, "Is it true? Did you really go there earlier? I don't believe it. Are you serious? Did you help someone who gave birth in that house?" said Mrs. Amber. I didn't know that Mrs. Amber knew the house. Suddenly, I was even more shocked and curious about her. What's there? When Amber invited me to sit beside her and whispered to me, she said, "Alice, do you know that there is an empty house that has been there for a few years?" In that house, there was indeed a person who was known to be good, namely Mr. John, and there was a girl who was pregnant. And there was a robbery and murder that caused all family members to die. After hearing that, I was very shocked and I fainted at that time. The story is from the chicken rice cellar near my house, so Amber's mother told her husband to carry it to her house. When the next day I woke up from fainting with the condition of my body that I felt at that time was weak and hot. When my eyes were open and my husband asked what really happened, but I didn't want to talk about it because I didn't know why. It was as if someone was holding me back from talking about it. And my husband asked me, "Where were you last night?" said my husband. Even though yesterday afternoon I had asked permission from him, but he didn't feel that I asked permission to go with the midwife. In fact, my husband said yesterday afternoon that I only went out for a while to buy something, not permission to go with the midwife. This seemed strange, and there was an argument between me and my husband. After that, I calmed my mind and went to my room. A few moments later, when I was about to go to the toilet to urinate, after I finished and wanted to close the toilet door, suddenly in front of me, there was a figure of a creature. At that time, I fainted again because I couldn't hold back my fear. And what I saw was that it was really Mr. John, but covered in blood, many wounds on his body, and his eyes were protruding. How could I not be shocked to see that figure? I was moved to the room and lifted by my husband. After I woke up, my husband asked me again what really happened and what I was feeling that I could faint. I wanted to talk about it, but it was still like something was holding me back from talking about the incidents. My husband was already angry with me, and I just kept quiet. For several days, I was always like that. When I went to the toilet, when I went to sunbathe, basically as long as I left the room and no one was at home, the figure continued to bother me. The figure continued to appear in front of me, and I continued to be disturbed by the ghost. After a while, my husband said that something strange had happened to me, and this was not normal. And my husband invited a paranormal. At that time, the paranormal came to the house and knew everything that had happened to me, even though I had not told him. And that's where my husband also knew the problem, because I also told him in more detail about the same incidents that had happened. At that time, the paranormal said that my husband, I, and my child were ordered to leave the house and had to go far from my house. I went to the city to my aunt's house and everything was safe while I was staying at my aunt's house until now in 2025.